Morning, everyone. How are you all?
Good morning.
Good. Everybody doing all right?
Yep.
Okay.
How are you doing?
Good. It's a good day.
Okay.
It's a big day. I'm heading out of town for a couple of days just to do Wisconsin with Katie's parents over there and things. So a couple of days gone. So there's a lot of last minute work to get done. So apologize. I'm just turning my phone ringer off there. So yeah, busy day. That's all good. It's all good. All right, so I think we're in Exodus 20 still.
Yep.
Still? No, I'm just kidding. We're in the commandments, I believe. I think we left off with the you shall not commit adultery one, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let's stay in the discomfort on that one.
Yeah.
Let's really stay there. Hang on, I'm just getting my sheet there. Yeah, so I think what we talked about last week, well, just in general with the commandments, and it was interesting because I saw a video last night, a YouTube, what they call like a short, right? So it's a little clip of a bigger thing. And you know, obviously your phone is listening always to you, so it's making recommendations based on what you talk about. Seeing as we're talking about this, it picks up on Ten Commandments stuff pretty quickly, and so it starts recommending videos about Ten Commandments, right, about those things. And the video last night was interesting because it talked about, you know, like in the first verse, and God spoke all these words saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, okay? And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, how that's kind of like the formation of it, right? And so in other words, hey, this is who I am, and remembering who I am, now let's talk about what that relationship with me looks like, right? So we talked about it from that perspective. And what was interesting about this clip was basically the point of view that, okay, so those first couple of verses, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. If you remain close to me, then you will have no other gods, right? Then you will not have any idols. You will remember the Sabbath day. And so it's an interesting perspective because it basically, it changes the Ten Commandments from the law that we follow, the rules, the guide, the curve, the mirror, into something that we do as long as we stay close to God. And it was a fascinating perspective, but I think where it runs into some problems is the concept of, well, then it's all on me, right? And so in other words, if I'm not keeping the commandment, I'm not being close to God, which is true. There's an element to that, but then also it lends itself to the concept of if I just stay close enough to God, I should be able to do these things. And the reality is, in a broken and sin-filled world, that's not possible, right? There's only one person who is able to do that, and it's Jesus, right? And so it was just an interesting perspective and using some of that. It was just a little slight twist. His thinking behind that was the verbiage "you shall not" is actually "you will not." And I go, what's the difference, right? Like but for him it's that concept of I should be able to live perfectly because I keep God close to me, and that's just not how we go into this. Now, do we try? Absolutely. But as we've seen, and really the point of that whole thing is, what these commands are not about behaviors, they're about attitudes. We've talked about that, right? You know, you talk about the first three. Yes, there's a set of instructions, commandments, right? But it really comes back down to the heart, right? And even the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th commandment, all those commandments. Yes, there are behaviors, but it all comes back to the heart. And we saw that with Jesus, right? About murder, that it's not just a physical act, it is an attitude. When I hate my brother, it comes back to attitude. The same thing with adultery. It's not well, as long as you don't cheat on your spouse with somebody, you're fine, right? It's an attitude. If you look at a woman with lustful intent, and I think that there's something to that Jesus goes as far to say is, hey guys, you're going to be prone to falling into this more than girls are, right? Like,
Yep.
It's not a coincidence that he says, whoever looks at a woman with lustful intent. He didn't say someone, he just says a woman. Well, guys, that kind of narrows it down for us pretty quick as to what he might be speaking to or who he might be speaking to, right? But it all comes back down to an attitude, right? And those attitudes, as long as we're on this side of eternity, they're always going to be tainted by sin. They're always going to be marred by sin. Now again, that doesn't mean we don't try to live into the behaviors, but the pursuit of perfection in them is a lost battle, if that makes sense. And Jesus is the only one who's won that way. Don't mean to get off on a tangent on that, but I think that kind of summarized a little bit what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks here. Any questions at all before we jump into stealing?
I have one comment.
Yeah.
Do you think it was Jimmy Carter that really brought that to light more of the lust?
Mm-hmm.
Because, like you said, people think it has to be the act, not the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he brought to society saying, I have lusted, and everybody kind of goes, whoa.
Right.
And then he says, it was the thinking part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he brought that to light.
And he was ridiculed for it.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure he was. It's a countercultural thought, right? First of all, to be transparent in that and to admit that you have failed in those ways, right? But then again, if you honestly reflect at it, especially as like a 13 or 14-year-old boy, the sixth commandment is gone,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Pretty much.
it's not even like, well, when I was 55 or something like that. It didn't take long, right? Like it's done when you're 13 or 14. But it's the attitude, right? Again, we talked about that I think last time. Like you get to the fourth commandment, you're like, okay, yeah, I've messed up in how I treat my parents. I don't always honor, respect, those kinds of things. Fifth commandment, murder, boy, I got one right. Like, yes, I got one down. And then you go, oh, wait, never mind. It's about hatred too. Okay, forget that. And then you get to the sixth commandment, you're like, okay, here's another one. I'm like 2 for 10, right? This isn't bad, right? Oh, no, it's an attitude? Okay, never mind. But no, it absolutely is. And I think Jimmy Carter was spot on in bringing that truth out. It's not just the physical act of whatever that is. It's very much the attitude. Because even as you go into the next few, which deal with a lot with possessions, right? And even the eighth commandment, which seems about false witness, but it is possessing reputation, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll talk more about that in the eighth commandment, but it all comes down to attitude and how you treat those possessions, especially when those possessions belong to somebody else. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I don't know if it's completely applicable here, but I remember Vern Gunderman. When our kids were growing up, it's like he said one thing you can tell about a boy you're going with, if you're a female, about a boy you're going with, find out how he treats his mother.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
With young kids.
Yeah.
It makes a difference on the attitudes towards males or males towards females and what have you.
Yeah, I would add to that. Look at how dad treats mom.
Yeah.
And then look at how son treats mom.
Yep.
Because
exactly.
I think you'll learn a lot about upbringing. You'll learn a lot about those elements, and you'll learn a lot about what might be in your future, right? And that's not to say people can't change or that somehow the son. Yeah. But you should see something in either of those two areas that gives you a good idea. Mm-hmm. And I would even articulate that for the opposite side of that, girls, how they treat their dads, and moms, how they treat the husband, right? I think that there's some element of that too. Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Oh, good thoughts. Anything else this morning? All right, that's all we got. Thanks for coming in. All right, so seventh commandment. Let's let's just kind of, we'll read through, we'll start in verse 15, and we'll just kind of go through the rest of chapter 21, rereading that to refresh it. You shall not steal. There, done. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off, and said to Moses, You speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. And the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, You have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings, and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. And every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it out of hewn stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be exposed on it. Be not exposed on it, excuse me. It's an important clarification. It's the difference between Baal and actual God, right? So you shall not steal. Pretty basic stuff, right? Just don't take something that belongs to you. But again, that's an attitude piece. It's easy to use the example in confirmation of, hey, when you're at a store, don't take the candy bar, right? Actually buy it and those kinds of things. But looking at the attitude that goes behind it, it's more the concept of that you think it's okay to hurt somebody else in that, right? Whether it's the store in that instance, or an example, or an individual who owns the store, or the corporation, or whatever it might be. There's a long line that goes into it, but it really comes back down to attitude. And attitudes that are reflected in even previous commandments, right? Again, there's a reason God goes, first one, I am the Lord your God, I'm in. The rest flow out of that. And so when you're stealing in different ways, it causes you to reflect, or it should cause you to reflect, how is this honoring God? How is this keeping him in the first commandment place versus even breaking that commandment? Because in some element throughout the rest of these, you're always breaking the first commandment somewhere down the line. Okay? And of course, it's not just the candy bar. It's wasting time, right, at work, or when you're on the clock. It's not paying laborers fair wages, right? You're stealing from them, right? Like there's lots of different ways that this goes into it, and it's so complete that it only takes 4 words to say it, and you can just expand on that entire thing for eons and eons and eons with what that all means. But essentially, it really comes down to, do you respect, do you care, do you see the person who is impacted by this as someone created in the image of God, and do you see who God is in your life? That's what it always comes down to. So any questions about that at all? All right, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's a fun one. Okay. What's fascinating about that particular commandment is that some have taken that to be in a legal context. So in other words, it's basically like, hey, if you're in court testifying, don't lie, like tell the truth. And so there's that element that is associated with the 8th commandment. But also, and I think it fits the context of these overall commandments, it's again talking about caring for your neighbor, right? Don't lie about them. You as a person have the opportunity to do a lot of damage or to care for someone greatly, regarding how you speak of them, what you say about them, how you treat them, right? And so bearing false testimony against your neighbor, false witness, really can do a lot of damage to somebody, and not because you're just telling a little white lie. Those things can really escalate. Yeah, Denise.
I always said to my confirmation students, I said, guys, for boys, it's the 6th commandment that gets them in trouble, and I go, and it's the 8th commandment for girls. For all the gossiping and drama that we like to create. And they were always like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and you see this a lot, and I think this is one of the, I think this has become one of the more premier issues. Again, it's not like a hot button issue where that's the thing and we always focus on that. But I think with the increase in social media consumption and news access and all of these things, it has become the grandiose commandment, if you will, where it just is ignored. Because if it's a headline
that, realize it.
Well, and no, and even if it's a headline that grabs, like there are so many little taglines on news articles, right? And then you read the news article, you go, that's not at all what it says, right? Or that's not at all what he said, or what she said, or what they said, or whatever, right? Like it's just, but we kind of brush it aside in the name of generating interest, or keeping informed, right? When in reality, the truth is not being spoken, and it causes serious damage. There are so many studies showing the effects of social media on children under a certain age, and I want to say it's like 8th grade, that are just damaging to their brain development, like physical development, that's coming as a result of what they experience online, right? There's just a lot that goes into it, and so it's not even like an emotional thing, it's also a physical thing. And I can't speak to how many times you've had, especially kids, in relationship to this, and that's why I'm speaking to kids, Denise, because of your comment there, just where that's led a lot of teenagers to go, and even thinking that there's no hope, right? Yeah. There's nothing there for them, because someone won't stop telling a lie. And it doesn't seem like a lie, but it absolutely is, right?
It could probably be true of adults too.
Oh, yeah, there's no question. There's no question, right? We as adults, we are much better at self-justification, right? So that we are in the right, even if it means we have to bury somebody else to be in the right. And it may not be 100% true, but it's how we remember it, or how we interpret what we experience, right? But it's always those pieces as adults in particular where we run into problems, where we want to, for lack of a better way of saying it, we want to come out on top, and we're willing to throw anybody or anything underneath it to make sure that we do, just to look good. Which then again goes to idolatry, which then goes to first commandment, which then goes to I'm in trouble.
Again.
Again. No, it's not just a kid thing, but it seems with this increase in access and activity, most people think this connectivity all the time, connectedness all the time, it's just not, it's not panning out the way people had thought, especially for kids. It's just not the way the future was envisioned, I think, when they were creating some of these opportunities. Yeah.
But I think in some cases, they almost want it to become addictive.
Oh,
Those
for sure.
The creators of Facebook and all these other, I don't know them all, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, you just even look at things like just soda, right? I mean, you want to talk about pop.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll use the Minnesota term. Pop. It's intentionally addictive, right? It's meant to taste good so that you want to keep drinking it over and over again, right? But even that's the only way you can continually get customers back. right?
Like
is to
smoking
create-
and vaping now
Yep.
is a new thing, and
Yeah, vaping. Yep. Yeah, there's all those elements to that, and it's fascinating how much companies that have nothing to do with biology understand biology, if that makes sense. So how much that goes into their product decisions, how much that goes into thought processes, dopamine levels, all those things. Yeah.
This really points up also the extremely difficult job parents have, because they're the guides.
Yep. Well, and grandparents too.
Well,
Because sometimes-
absolutely. Oh,
Sometimes
absolutely.
kids don't feel comfortable talking to their parents about
Oh,
it
yeah.
for one reason or another. Right?
Yeah.
And so they confide in grandma or grandpa about it, and it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah,
It's a challenge. Again, you look at progress, you look at movement forward, and we always think of progress as a good thing that helps and benefits society. But it's hard. It's hard to always see that when you have things like this that actually seem to be prohibiting or even damaging progress or society, right? So it's hard, and how do you navigate that? The biggest question always is this thing, like at
Yeah.
what point do you give one to your kids? And
yeah,
everybody's got a whole bunch of different thoughts on it, right?
and now you can track your kids by using your phone.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yet the kids know how to then disconnect, it's like pulling the plug. Sometimes. It'll look like I'm still at Sue's house, but, you
Yep.
know,
Oh yeah, you can track anybody you want. Oh yeah, that's not an issue anymore. Like that's the funny part, is the illusion of privacy in this. Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day. Maybe I shared this, but there was something. Somebody wanted me to watch a video about Christian music, and so I was going to it, but I needed to sign up for this thing, and it was asking for really invasive information. Like
yeah.
I grew up in an age, technologically, where you did give some more information than, say, the previous generation. So I'm sure for like my parents looking at what we signed up for, they're like, why would you give them that information? That's terrible, right? That's terrifying. And now I'm in that same place of looking at what they're asking for from my kids. I'm going, why would you give them that information? That's terrifying. But it's the concept of, I don't know that there has really been privacy in the last 30 years, 40 years overall, right? And so part of me goes, if you really want it, you know where to get it. Just go get it. That's fine. But it's different. It's very, very different. So yeah, I mean, you can find anybody, anywhere, at any time, if you really want to. Yeah.
I heard about a survey or something of, people our age, if you would rather go back to the 60s or in the 70s than where you are today as far as families.
Yeah.
And everybody would say yes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because you didn't have to deal with.
Right. It's always a new set of issues. And even though there's, Ecclesiastes is absolutely 100% correct on this, that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like, Egyptians didn't have this, right? Like when you talk about the ancient Egyptians. But the thought processes behind this, the attitudes behind this,
Yep.
it's nothing new, right?
But it's scarier.
It is. It's just different, right? It's just a different kind of way, and that's the unknown aspect of it. But I think that's where we as Christians can try to speak to some of those things because of what we've seen and experienced in the past. It may not be just for Katie and I when we talk about cell phone usage. Like Nick struggles because he's one of the few kids who doesn't have a cell phone, right? He doesn't. And Nick is 12. Yeah, Nick is 12. Zach is 9. And where was I at the other night? Oh, we were at the Twins game the other night. The one that they were down 13-5 and then almost came back. We left when it was 10-5, and then they hit a 3-run shot as we were walking out, and you go, "Yep, it's a good time to leave." And then we're in the car, and we're going, "That was a terrible time to leave." So, anyways, but they had this as they got into the 8th inning, they did this light up, light down thing or something. But use your flashlight on your phone, right? Up, down, up, down. And the amount of kids that were reaching in their pockets to pull out cell phones, they were easily Zach's age and younger, right? And I'm not trying to criticize or judge that. It was just surprising to me. But it's one of those challenges for parenting, right? And it's one of those things that the previous generation of parents didn't really have to think about, because there wasn't a cell phone when I was Nick's age. There was some, I think, in people's cars, right? But there really wasn't a widely dispersed situation in that. In fact, I still remember when I was at seminary, and that was 10 years ago? No, 14 years ago now. 14 years ago now. Yeah.
Climbs on you.
You look good for your age.
Yeah. I remember, and I still remember this, and I don't know why I remember this in particular, but I had my phone, and I accidentally hit the internet button, like that was on your phone, right? So you could go on the internet. Well, to go on the internet 14 years ago on your phone, you got charged like exorbitant amounts of cash, right? And so I'm sitting there like hitting the back button as fast as I can, hoping that it doesn't connect. And now it's like, oh, hey, hang on, let me sign on to Google real quick and let me just watch 10 videos on my phone, right? And it's just so easy access.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, I mean, things have definitely changed in relationship to how things operate. And that's a challenge. How do you navigate that? How do you deal with the reality of your son feeling left out because he doesn't have one, right? And how do you bear witness in that as a parent, in a Christ-centered way, in a helpful way that he understands? Doesn't necessarily make the feelings of left out go away. So how do you navigate that? And so it's a challenge, but like I said, I think there's an opportunity in that for Christians to be able to speak a little bit more into why they do what they do. You know, you talk about this, and we've talked about this with Nick. For our perspective, and we didn't explain it to him this way, but it's a care of creation. It's a stewardship thing. We know that our son is not ready for this, and we know that it's going to be harmful to him at this point if he has one, physically and just emotionally, with how he is as a child. And so knowing that, we know that he'll get one, and we tell him that there will be a time you have one. It just won't be today. And we'll keep looking, we'll keep evaluating, we'll keep trying to do the best we can to take care of him, but also help him feel connected still to his friends. Yeah, but it's a different challenge. Yeah.
It is a double-edged sword, though, because when you think about this, I mean, yeah, there are all the negatives, but also if he's in an emergency situation, you know, or whatever,
it's
a communication tool.
It's the immediacy, right? It's the I'm in this situation now and I need help now, versus like, hey, I gotta ride my bike home to the landline or whatever it is and try to make a phone call for that. But we still have a landline for that reason, you know.
We do too.
So that we can.
Not for that reason.
We also just don't let them go anywhere. We just say, stay in the basement.
Wait a minute.
That's not it.
With his color book.
Yeah, with his coloring book, yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, you've all seen my basement in the videos of the Legos. He's not bored. Yeah. Let's be honest. There's tons of Legos down there for him. But, you know, it's that fine line of, especially for kids nowadays, of what is the appropriate tech allowance, if you will, right? Like, what do you give them access to? What do you not give them access to? Because it is a technologically dependent world, and so if you don't give them access, you are holding them back from potentially being involved in things at school and their future. You talk about their employment opportunities, their work, right?
Yeah.
But also at the same time,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to be frank here about this, you'd like to see them survive to have a job because they made it through all of the tech stuff with bullying and cyberness and ugliness that just comes through the internet, and the stuff that is just so widely accessible that shouldn't be. Yeah. It's
Communication is really important, though. I mean, parents need to, continually be in communication, not on a do this and do that, but on a more equal level, not equal, but to discuss it. Well, how are you feeling about this? This is why I'm doing this. How do you feel about that? And can you see where, it's maybe a negotiation process or
well, it's an
something,
understanding, right? And helping them understand. And there's some non-negotiables, right? And knowing that, just, hey, this is this is a boundary we've set because we know it's a healthy one for our family. This is where we want to go with that. But just know this is how you can operate in that boundary, which still gives you access to the things that
Yeah.
you want access to, just in a different way. Yeah.
When so many children are not in a family,
Correct.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
and your kids have to deal with that too.
Mhm.
That's different for them.
Mhm. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. Which is why it's like, Jesus can come back any day.
Yeah. Amen.
Anytime.
Lord Jesus.
Yep. I used to be of the opinion, it's like, it'd be nice to see my son get married, and have a kid, and, see those things. I'd like to see my kids, be successful in life. And I go, yeah, no, I'm good. If they get to that point, I'm looking forward to it. There's no question about that. But if they don't get there, the joys of eternity are far better than those joys that come from that.
Yep.
So let's get cracking, Jesus. Let's go. Let's go. Any other questions about the 8th commandment? Yeah, Ruth.
When you mentioned with your neighbor,
Yeah.
we have a very unhealthy situation with our neighbor. And we have prayed about it, we have been silent about it, we've been yelled about it. But it's just getting ridiculous. And she definitely has an issue, so that's why we try to not, something is definitely wrong.
Sure.
But she actually yells, very loudly yells to our yard and the neighbor behind us. The joke is, did you get yelled at today?
Sure.
And it's very hard because we have our yard that we have, the patio, we have well, it's actually almost a 4-season screen porch. And we had my brother and a friend over talking, and all of a sudden, this yelling started, and so he understood what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And, she just screams at you
Mm-hmm.
to stop talking. I can hear every word you say.
Mm-hmm.
And as a homeowner, you're not gonna go out in your yard and whisper
Mhm.
all the time. But we don't go out standing next to the fence and,
Mm-hmm.
yell at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the part that has hurt me a lot was, two of them. It was with my grandchildren. When my grandchildren would go out to play, she would actually slam her door.
Sure.
And my grandkids would jump. And so when they come over to the house, they would always look
Mm-hmm.
to see.
Mhm.
And that really made me mad, thinking that my kids have fear in my own backyard.
Sure.
And then it gets a little dicier where her son works in the school district, and he
Mhm.
happens to work at their school,
Mm-hmm.
and he works with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so at first I thought, oh my goodness, but it was so nice when he was outside, our grandsons right away go, oh, hi, Mr. S. And he talked with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure when he came inside, Mom told him something, because he was nice to the kids. And all she has been is bitter. And it's gotten so bad when I said one time, I said, what a beautiful day out. And she said, not with you in it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
Not
God.
with you in it. And then and then I don't want to give you goosebumps, but it wasn't too long after that, I was diagnosed with cancer. And I thought, this lady's a witch.
She has
But
powers.
it sticks with you. This person next door doesn't even value my life. She doesn't, she would rather, and she's the one that moved into the neighborhood, and she's kind of had thought the whole neighborhood should work around her. The neighbors are pulling, believe me, we would all love to see her go away. But it's just awful. And how do you deal with, we try to enjoy, even with John and I, we'll go out and we look to see if the door's open. She has a patio door. And I'm just going, I guess I want to say there are neighbors that just it just isn't working in that.
Yeah. So I think what it always comes down to in those instances is how do you honor God in those moments, right? So what's the way to do that? Do you pray for her? Do you put the best construction on everything, right? Those are some of the things Scripture speaks to in those moments. It's not easy by any stretch of those things, but I think the question that just comes to mind for me on that is just how do you honor God in that, right? What's the best way to approach that and address that? And it can be a similar situation to a fourth commandment kind of thing, where it's the honoring of the father and mother. But what if your mother and father aren't worthy of honor and respect, right? As we've talked about some of those elements. Well, then there is an element to say, you know what, the best way I can honor you is by not engaging, right? Now you can't control behavior, you can't control others.
But
if
it
you
is
could, that would be
embarrassing
awesome.
when you
I'd
have
love to
family,
do it.
where you have people over, and you have somebody just going bananas. And when we had our grandsons over, it was like a cuckoo clock one time. She went out and yelled at us. And I was reading them their bedtime stories with a gas fire pit out there. And she goes, I'm gonna call the fire department on you. And I'm going, there's nothing to call on. And she went out and in 3 times, slamming the door, yelling, and so I call it the cuckoo clock, because she just kept going out and in. But it was so hard as a grandparent to have my grandkids witness this.
But I think it's also a good opportunity to talk to your grandkids about what they're seeing, right?
But they know her son, and they see such a difference with him.
But I think it's the question of what are you sharing with your grandsons, right? So how do you honor God in that, right? And that might be not necessarily speaking ill of her, right, to your grandsons, but helping them understand that someone here is not well, right? And providing some strategies for when they run into that in their life, not just in your backyard, because it won't be the only time.
She's not
the only
It's
one.
true. But it is really hard to live, because you want to go
Sure.
outside and enjoy.
Oh, for sure.
And you're just waiting for somebody to attack you.
Well,
And
I think that's a situation a lot of people go into in their neighborhoods. I think it's a situation a lot of people go into at work, where they've got hostile work environments with coworkers. And I think those all kind of converge back to that one question: how do you honor God in that? And yeah, your kids see things. We have this with our kids, right? They'll see something that we're going, man, I really wish you wouldn't have seen that today, because now I have to try to explain that unexpectedly, right? This is awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. But you have to take those opportunities and try to explain and share thoughts on it that are Christ-centered and that are useful for building up, if that makes sense. And then your actions have to reflect that. And if they don't, to be able to say to your grandkids, like if that happens around them, you know what, I didn't do that right, I should have done it this way, guys. We've done that with our kids too, where we've interacted incorrectly with someone, rudely, whatever it might be. And then the kids see it and they go, well, Dad, what about that? And you go,
there's an exception.
yeah. That's where you just say, listen, I'm gonna buy you some gum, go ahead and chew it. But then you go, yeah, you know what, you're right. I didn't handle that well. I should have been more patient, more respectful. I should have lashed out, whatever that was, to reinforce those values that you want to see in your grandkids.
Well, I'm just happy they're not yelling back at her.
But I mean, but
They
true,
are,
that's a very
they
good
respect,
point.
I mean, they know, and I always tell them they can always come in. I said, come on in.
But I think also helping them understand just the what they're seeing, what they're witnessing, because it may be hard or maybe something they're not usually exposed to. And so they're already thinking to themselves, okay, what is this? And they're gonna fill it in with their own information, if that makes sense, unless you sit down and talk with them and say, hey, I know this is what you're seeing, let me give you a little bit of information about that so you know. And just some thoughts on ways to handle that. Yeah, like one of those is come on inside if you ever see that. You don't have to talk back, you don't have to. In fact, I'd prefer if you didn't, just because I don't think it's helpful with her.
Yeah, I'm really
But
glad
it just,
that you don't.
those are always teachable moments, right? When you talk about the the commandments in general, when you talk about kids, grandkids, even just spouses, friends. I talked about that this weekend, someone who can speak truth into your life. It's important to have those people. As parents, that's the role we have, is to speak truth into our kids' lives. And that truth is not always fun, and it's not always enjoyable, because it's hard. It's a hard truth to be able to speak what the reality is around them, that things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And that includes in your neighborhood, right? Like you got a neighbor who isn't doing what would be normally expected of a neighbor. But again, you have opportunities to share what does being a neighbor look like, right? How do you interact with people who aren't neighborly, and just some great opportunities that way. I think those would be God honoring ways to walk through that. Yeah.
So if we go outside, are we tempting her? Because, you go outside and she's just listening, just wait. I mean, it's just like a hawk. She's just,
But if you notice the commandments, it's not about controlling others, it's about you, right?
Right.
And so that's the only thing you can control in that, is what you do.
For sure.
Right, so
We're going outside.
I wish God had a commandment that would allow me to go after somebody like that. That's not there. It always comes back to me, which is no, just in general, like,
That's right.
we all have somebody in our lives who are like, yeah, let's get a commandment for them. That would be awesome, right? Like, let's get this. But unfortunately, it's all about the you is me in this, right? And the you is
And
you,
we
right?
have been quiet. We have decided that we're gonna be quiet, but there's sometimes it'll slip out because you're just, especially when we have people over. That was embarrassing.
Oh, I get it. But again, how do you honor God? I think that's what it comes
Okay,
back to.
that's good.
Because that's all the commandments are. It's just how are you honoring God?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you for your help.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's not easy, that's for sure. All right, any other eighth commandment questions? It's probably just better to be quiet for the rest of our lives. No, I'm just kidding. Just teasing. No, it's not, it's a tough commandment. It's a hard one. But it's a powerful one to speak truth into. All right, so the next ones, we'll take 9 and 10 together. Shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now, what's interesting about this one is this is the only commandment. These two are the only commandments that don't speak to behaviors. They speak to attitude. So coveting is not an actual behavior, right? That would be addressed like in stealing or things of that nature. Coveting is very much a desire, right? And where people get mixed up is, well, then I can't want things. No, that's not true, okay? There's a difference between want and desire, right? Like, I want to eat Jimmy John's for lunch. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good want to have, kind of. It's questionable. But if I'm willing to go steal it to have it, deceitfully gain through it, right? Then that's a different situation where it even consumes my entire being as to how I'm going to acquire this. That's where it gets problematic. Because if it's consuming my entire being, guess what that means? There's no room for God, right? And desiring Him. And so coveting really comes down to the attitude, the heart, and our attitude and heart should be more towards God than it is our own stuff or other people's stuff. Does that make sense? So people look at this and they go, okay, well, I want a promotion. Is it a bad thing that I would want a promotion? No. I'd say that where it gets problematic is when it becomes all-consuming, right? Where you're willing to sacrifice everything, your family, your friends, even God, to try to accomplish that. That's where I would go, hey, there's an issue there, right? Or even in your job, living that out, having no time, just consumed by it all, and sacrificing family, friends, God in that. That's a problematic thing, right? So that's the difference here. And in that way, what it does it almost seems to restart the commandments, if that makes sense, right? So in other words, coveting, it pushes God out of my life, which, by the way, hey, let's go back to the first commandment again. You shall have no other gods. Let's keep going through, and then back again, and then back again. Versus, like, you get to 10 and be like, okay, we're done. We don't have to go back through that again. It just kind of restarts itself as you go through those commandments. So, cyclical. Any questions about that at all? So there you go, 10 commandments. Took us 3 weeks to get through them all, but we got through them. We got it. It's good. So now God lays this out. He says, hey, I am the Lord your God who saved you out of Egypt, out of slavery. Just remember that as I give you these commandments, because I want that to be the first and foremost thing as you walk through this, as you live through these commandments. We should be good, right? Except now this is how they respond. Now when all the people saw the thunder and flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off. Awesome. It's a great start. Right after God gives the commandments. And they said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die. Okay? There's a genuine fear there. And what it speaks to is not just God's physical presence in the moment on the mountain, but also how in these commandments you cannot escape God's presence in it, right? And so when you think about, there's the first 3, which are obviously about God, but even as you go into 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? God is present in those commandments as well, and you can't escape that. There's no wiggle room out of it, which is a good thing when it comes to our behaviors, but it's a really bad thing when it comes to salvation, because we're going to find that we're really short constantly when it comes to God and his expectations of us. So it's understandable how they are afraid. I mean, yes, there's a lot of Charlton Heston 10 Commandments movie magic happening here with the lightning and the thunder and all that stuff, but it's also the content. It's a recognition that God is there in those commandments, and they're not living up already to what God is asking of them.
Pastor,
Yeah,
why is the emphasis for 2 commandments on coveting?
yeah.
One commandment on killing, and 1 commandment on this and the other thing.
Yeah.
Why 2 on coveting?
Because it seems to be the biggest issue I think we have. I think that's always what it comes down to. I mean, you even talk about adultery, stealing, bearing false witness, right? In some ways, it all comes down to coveting, right? It all comes down to an unhealthy desire for other things outside of God. Even when it comes to just life in general, I think it speaks to God's knowing of who we are as his people and the importance of his role in our lives as we walk through that. But it's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. Because there's really not a, like one's dealing with possessions and the other one's dealing with like people, right? Like it's not a separation that way, why you would separate the 2 commandments. It's just kind of there, right? So yeah, it speaks to the nature we have as sinful people to want to fill up our spaces, not with God, but with other things, that we desire other things outside of him. Yeah, good question. Good question. I should also mention, some people have seen there's there's a couple of different ways that the 10 Commandments get laid out, right? So some have them, and I can't remember the layout exactly again, I apologize, but there's our layout, the way we look at it from our church point of view. And then there's a couple of other faith traditions that I think combine the first 2 commandments into one, or something like that. There's a different layout, and people go, well, what's the difference? Why is there a different layout? And really our layout comes from, who was the church father? I can't remember, but it was an early early century church fathers. So basically tradition, even with the Catholic Church coming through, that's where we see our ties back there. For the other version of that, it's more speaking to the Reformation kind of anti-Catholic movement, if that makes sense. So anything that was Catholic in origin, we need to change that because it's bad. And I'm not saying that that's the truth, I'm just saying like that's the perspective, by the way. But ours comes from that Catholic tradition of what the church fathers had. Yeah. Just so if you ever see that or somebody asked that, there was a question about that. A couple weeks ago in the evening class, like is there a biblical difference? There's not, right? You don't see here in the Bible, the first commandment is this, second commandment is this, third commandment is this. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So then Moses reassures them. He says, hey, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. And so he's telling them, don't be afraid. This is actually meant to be a help. It's not meant to be a hindrance or a hurt. It's meant to be a help. It's meant to be something that draws you closer to God, rather than something that pulls you further away from him. And again, as we've talked about with these tests, we've talked about them to some extent. It's not well, are you going to be faithful or are you not going to be faithful? It's just laying out the expectations. Hey, this is what the relationship looks like now, right? Here are the expectations. And yes, there's accountability in that. But it's not like you have 60 minutes, multiple choice, go, right? That's not the test that we're talking about here in that language. And it's important to note in that, just where they are in their relationship, right? What does Moses do? He steps forward, closer to God. What do the people of Israel do in their fear?
Step back.
Take a step back, right? So it kind of just gives them an idea, or gives us an idea of where that is and where they are. Okay? Because as we go through the next few chapters, essentially we start getting into some of the laws, some of the ways that they practice, the different things that God is looking for. But eventually we get to the golden calf, right? Which again, where you see where people of Israel are versus where Moses is in them. And then as we mentioned, just talking about those two different Ten Commandment versions. I can't remember again the exact layout, but essentially I think there's a joining of the last two and a couple or something like that. I can't remember. It's not a biblical concept, it's more just a faith tradition concept. In other words, everything that's there is supposed to be there. Good. So then, in verse 22, and the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourself gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. And every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it. So the first thing to note here in verse 22 is that God actually listened. Right, so the people of Israel in the previous verses, they say, hey, this is too much, God, we don't want to hear directly from you, we need to hear from Moses. And so what does God do in verse 22? He speaks to Moses, right? And he gives Moses the instructions to share with the people. So God listened, right? He listened to what they had to say, and he actually tried to help accommodate whatever words you might want to use for that. Okay. But then this, as we talk about the laws about the altars, we're gonna start getting into the laws about the slaves. There's a ton of laws that are gonna start coming after this now. And it basically runs from Exodus 20:22 through Exodus 23:19. So now, you've got the 10 Commandments, keeping that as like the structure, the starting point. Now we talk about the application of those 10 Commandments in key areas. So you want to talk about the worship, let's talk about the altars, right? You want to talk about treatment of people, let's talk about how you treat slaves. And we'll talk more about that next time. That particular set of laws, the rationale, the spirit behind it, because we look at slavery and go, that's not a good look, right? Like, it's not a good thing. So we'll talk more about that. But essentially, it's the application now. How do you apply those 10 Commandments in these various areas that are really key elements, key areas for Israel's life? Any questions about that? All right, so then God reinforces again in verse 23, you shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make yourselves gods of gold. All right, let's go back to number 1, no other gods. Nip it in the bud. So again, we see that application already happening. Hey, this is the first commandment, right? You shall have no other gods. Well, here we go with the Lutheran question, what does this mean, right? Now we're getting the what does this mean? Do not make gods of gold or silver, okay? But it also means you got to build altars, and there's some requirements for those altars. So an altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, and every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. Okay. So this earth material could be stone, it could be used as some other kind of earth thing, right? Dirt. I think Abraham used sticks at one point, like the tree of Mamre and things, to build altars, right? And so it has to be some form of natural creation, if that makes sense. And we'll see the logic in that as we keep walking through this, but ideally the point is, hey, this altar is to the God who created the heavens and the earth, right? And so he is the created God of all things, not the created God, but he is the God who created all things. And so those altars reflect that identity of who God is, if that makes sense. That's why they should use earth things, for lack of a better way of saying it. Stones, naturally occurring elements. Okay? Which then goes into the hewn stone in verse 25. So basically it's a stone that's been kind of chiseled up a little bit, given a nice fresh polish, nice look to it, those kinds of things. And the reason for that restriction is so that, let me back up. The reason for that restriction is when you think about the purpose of the altar, it's to give honor and glory to God, to thank him, to sacrifice to him, those kinds of things. When it becomes an artistic thing, then all of a sudden it can be credit, honor, and glory can be given to the artist rather than to God. It's also as if to say God in his creation was not enough, right? So the beauty wasn't already there. We had to make it beautiful, right? So in either way you look at it, God wants to make sure it's very clear, abundantly clear, you shall have no other gods. That even means your altar that you use to sacrifice should reflect that I am your only God, okay?
So we have a hewn altar?
Yeah, but this doesn't exist anymore that way, yeah. Yeah, Jesus came to fulfill the law, Ross. That's what we got. Yeah. And it's different, as you go through the different methods that God came to his people and the way that was all done. Yeah, it's just a different time. But at this point, in this time in Israel's history, yeah, that would have been a big mistake. Big mistake. Yep. Yep. And so many other altars that are in churches across, yeah.
Everywhere.
Yep.
What's the matter of the heart? You can't,
Correct.
we're not worshiping that altar.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
And what I like about our altar is it's meant more to be like a table than it is like a sacrificial altar, if that makes sense. So you think about Old Testament altars and things, it's more a reflection of the Lord's table than it is a reflection of like the Old Testament sacrificial system. So it's wood, right?
But it's remembering his body and blood.
Correct. Which is why I like the table feel that it has to it. Some altars at different churches are very stone-based and some things of that nature that are a little bit more Old Testament feeling. And that's not a bad thing, but what I like about it is it keeps the table centered on the Lord's Supper versus something else. That makes sense. That's what I like about it.
I know we can't do this today, we don't have the time, but the figurines,
Yeah.
the difference, there's differences, I understand, that you should not make an image of God.
Oh, sure. Yep.
You know, like we have a picture of Jesus, or not a picture, but on the cross, you know,
Mhm.
and there are churches that don't
Yep.
do that.
Yep.
Maybe we talk about that next time, maybe.
Yeah, let's defer that conversation.
That's why I said it.
Yeah. Giving you a hard time, Russell. Giving you a hard time. No, there is that question that comes up, frankly, and it should come up because it is something that the people look at and go, okay, so what do you do with that? Like, how do you handle that? So yeah, let's bring it up next time we talk through
Okay.
that. And then just one last point on the no steps, right? That last part about you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it. You know, that was the gist of it, right? No steps because everybody could see what was underneath when you walked up the steps, right? So nothing inappropriate. So the garbs that the priests would wear, or the people who would perform the sacrifices, they would not have undergarments on. And so it's meant to maintain the holiness, if you will, and the sacredness of the space. Now later on, that all changed as the priests and things, as they started wearing undergarments when they got into the promised land. But at this point in their journeying, there's not undergarments per se, right? And so there's that idea. So actually this law will change once they get into the promised land, once they set up Israel as a nation, where they can actually not have to worry about steps. You can have steps, essentially. Yeah. But at this point, no steps. Nobody needs to see it. That's the point. Keep it holy, keep it sacred. Awesome. So next week, I'm actually out of town. I'm going to make a visit on a church in Indiana to check out a ministry they've got there, to see if that's something we might be able to do here at Beautiful Savior. So it's kind of exciting to be able to go take a look and see what another church is doing and see how that looks for us.
You're not gonna go out and try to go to that church as a pastor, you're gonna stay here.
Yeah, no, I'm not. They're fully staffed, buddy. Yeah, no, they're good. They're good. No, I'm going out with, I'm flying out with Katie, and another member of our church here, Tori Dillon. She goes to the 10:45 service. We're out there checking it out and seeing what they got going for ministry stuff there. So it's really, really cool. Really exciting. So,
Is it a specific ministry? Or-
yeah, it's a counseling ministry. Yep, counseling ministry. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see what that all looks like and what that might look like for us. So it's exciting.
So we're not gonna meet next week?
Yeah, no class next week. Okay, no class next week. So hold on to the miniatures question until the week after. How about the
I was
models
going to tell
question?
you to write that down so I don't miss that.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Well, let's thank you guys for today. Let's close in prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank you for your care for us as your creation. Whether that's just in providing for our everyday needs or even just telling us the things that are good for us and the things that are not good for us. I thank you for this class. I thank you for all who will join us throughout the week online. And just continue to bless their walk with you. Help us all not to be afraid of you, but to see you as the God who not just saved Israel out of slavery from Egypt, but the God who saves us from the slavery to our sins and our sinful natures. And so just bless the rest of our day, Lord. In your name we pray.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Okay.